We often talk about God's blessing or being blessed by God. Some equate God's blessing to having lots of money or being pain free in this life or being free from sickness in this world. Often, being blessed by God or God's blessing has its purpose in making us more comfortable or centering everything upon us. However, I want us to step back for a second. I want us to think about God's blessing. God's blessing is not mainly for our comfort or for our own success in this world. Surely the prosperity gospel and claims to health and wealth are heretical when it refuses to talk about the biblical understanding of sin or suffering or even Christ as a suffering Messiah. I want us in these next couple of moments to remind ourselves of the biblical reason behind God's blessing in our lives. The passage I'm going to look at first is Psalms 67 verses 1 to 3. It says this: May God be gracious to us and bless us, and make his face to shine upon us, that your way may be known on earth, your saving power among all nations. Let the peoples praise you, O God. Let all the peoples praise you. Here, when the psalmist prays for God's blessing, consider what he asks. He asks for God to be gracious to us, to bless us, and to make his face to shine upon us. Well, what does that mean? We don't deserve God's favor or help in this life. So the psalmist asks for God's grace to give us what we don't deserve. He asks for God's face to shine upon us. Well, let's expand a little bit on what it means for God's face to shine upon us. Well, as commentaries and Christian dictionaries know, it seems that by calling on the face of God to shine on us, he is asking for God's express kindness to be upon us, for his protection, for God's help in our lives, rather than having God's frown upon us. It is a reference and a symbol of God's presence to be upon us, for God himself to be with us, for his acceptance. In traditional Mediterranean society, to have one's face lifted is a bestowal of honor by a superior to an inferior. So the psalmist seems to be pleading with God for his acceptance, for his help, protection, and presence to be upon us, for God's face to shine on us, for God to be with us. What could be greater than God himself with us? That is blessing. But in verse 2, we see the purpose of this request. The purpose or goal of this blessing of God to be with us, to bless us, is so that God's way may be known on earth, for his saving power to be among all nations. That's what we see in verse 2. You see, the goal of God's blessing in our lives, for his presence and help in our lives, is not for our immediate comfort or materialism. It's so that God himself will be known all the more in this world. We ask for God's blessing so that people would know God through us and in our lives. We want God in our lives and in our homes, in our work, so that other people can see God's goodness, can come to know God as well as we share God to them through our words and through our deeds. And verse 3 expands and proclaims, let all the peoples praise you, O God. Let all peoples praise you. So do you, brothers and sisters, have this missional mindset and biblical mindset about God's blessing in your lives? The blessing of God in our lives is for the sake of making God known to others. And what is the greatest blessing God has given us so that we can know him? Well, it's Christ himself, Jesus Christ. It is the cross and Christ's death and resurrection. We can know God's blessing and know God's favor through faith in Christ. Through Christ, there is no condemnation. Through Christ, God accepts us when we trust in him. But there is God's presence in us through Christ. Christian, you have been blessed with knowing Christ so that you can share Christ with others who do not know him. What are some other practical things we can ask God for to bless us with so that others may know him? Well, for example, we could pray for God's blessing in our marriages, in your marriage, that you would love your spouse well, to honor your spouse well, to be able to display Christ and the church wonderfully in your marriage, so that your kids and the watching world may be able to see the biblical picture of marriage and be pointed to Christ, be pointed to God. When you go to work, ask for God's blessing, for his face to shine upon you, to be able to work well, to work ethically, to work efficiently, to know God's pleasure as you work. And as you receive that blessing, to be able to adequately display his goodness and proclaim the gospel to others around you, around those whom you work with, well and joyfully, so that they may also know Christ and know God. Lastly, God does not promise any of us that we will be rich or have lots of things in this world. But for those of us who do have a lot, consider how to use your resources to bless other people and to meet other people's needs. Use it as an opportunity to share the gospel with other people and to love other people with whoever is willing to hear. Many blessings to you all in Christ today. May every blessing you receive from God be used to make his name known in all the earth and in all of your life.